Joining us now is a U.S. Senator representing the state of Michigan, Gary Peters, joining us on the MegaCast. He was on hand earlier on this week as Congress was addressed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky relating to the Russian war in Ukraine. Senator Peters, thank you for being with us today.
Well, pleasure to be with you again.
Appreciate having you on. So for you and for your colleagues in both chambers of Congress at the federal level, what was it like for you yesterday to hear the words from the front lines from President Zelensky of Ukraine as his country deals now for several weeks at this point with an invasion from Russia?
Well, certainly, we are all impressed and inspired by President Zelensky, his courage, his leadership in the face of this onslaught from Mr. Putin and this unprovoked illegal attack on the country. And certainly we are all just so troubled to see the images of what is happening in Ukraine. The video that the president played was particularly powerful to show the extent of the devastation that the Russian military is doing to the country of Ukraine. And certainly our hearts go out to the Ukrainian people. And it just really strengthened our resolve to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to help the Ukrainian people in the form of military assistance to help the Ukrainian military fight against this unprovoked attack by the Russian military and Mr. Putin, as well as provide humanitarian aid for folks both in Ukraine as well as the refugees that are now flowing across the borders to get away from the war.
So, Senator, we've heard the calls from Ukrainians, including from government officials such as President Zelensky, asking for NATO and for Western allies in and outside of NATO to conduct a no-fly zone over Ukraine. And there's where this balancing act comes into play. Because on the one hand, as you said, we in the U.S. want to help our friends over in Ukraine. This is an unprovoked invasion by a world superpower that is taking a harrowing effect on the citizens of Ukraine. But at the same time, you're playing a balancing act there, too, because you want to provide as much assistance as possible to this nation that is under attack without further provoking a world superpower and escalating this conflict. Where does that balance come into play in the negotiations internally in the U.S. government from that standpoint, and what can be provided to the Ukrainians without then provoking President Putin, who clearly is not all there and is willing to escalate this to significant levels if he is provoked?
Well, and that's an incredibly important question, and you're right about Mr. Putin. We have to. He's not acting rationally in my mind. Maybe in his mind somehow it's rational, but to do what he's doing simply makes no sense. We have to remember that Russia does possess nuclear weapons, and they have tactical nuclear weapons that they believe that they can use in Europe. So it is a dangerous situation. Folks, certainly President Zelensky is asking for a no-fly zone, and if I were him, I'd be asking for everything that I could to help my country. But we do have to weigh the potential impact of escalation involving NATO troops on the ground in a war that could spin into very dangerous proportions. I think it's important for folks to realize that if we put a no-fly zone, that brings us into combat. And we're relying on our advice from our military leaders. But in order to put together a no-fly zone, the first thing you have to do is go in and take out anti-aircraft systems that the Russians have in place that would put those aircraft in jeopardy. And when you attack those systems, you will be killing Russian soldiers that are manning those sites. Those sites will fire back on our aircraft, and according to our military experts, we will lose American pilots in that operation. And then once that occurs, if there's any incursion from Russian aircraft, you have to shoot them down, and you will be in air combat. And we can do it. We can have a no-fly zone, but folks have to realize that there will be casualties, both Russian and American casualties in actual combat, and that is clearly a significant escalation.
We've heard some rumors too, Senator Peters, that the Russian government may be considering the use of biological weapons, and that they have been beginning propaganda efforts to state that Ukraine may or may not be producing biological weapons as an excuse. And we've seen President Putin do this, where he kind of casts blame on an adversary, so to speak, and then commits that exact act. That being said, biological weapons, obviously egregious. It's something that the United States has in the past, in other conflicts worldwide, said that is a sort of red line where there will be some intervention, at least in the form of sanctions in that regard. But in this conflict, I think there's quite a lot of curiosity from the American public and from the worldwide community as well. Are there any red lines in this conflict that Russia could cross that would then spark or require, is probably a better word to use, require further effort from the U.S. and from NATO allies in order to protect the security of the entire world?
Well, certainly we have responsibilities with NATO, and if any NATO territory is breached by the Russian military, our treaty obligations as part of NATO would require a response of the entire alliance against Russia. So I think Mr. Putin knows that. Hopefully that is a major deterrent for him to do that. But certainly that is a line to be crossed. And we had a recent attack near the Polish border that killed a number of Ukrainian service members and civilians, but it was very close. But if you have an attack on territory of a country that's part of NATO, that would be clearly a red line.
We're joined by U.S. Senator Gary Peters on the Michigan MegaCast. Senator, I know that we're short on time, so before I let you go, I do want to ask you, you and a fellow Michigan Senator, Debbie Stabenow, recently introduced the Help Education After Loss, or HEAL Act, to address mental health in our schools, inspired by the wake of the tragic shooting at Oxford High School in November of 2021. Can you tell us a little bit about this act and the ways that it may help students in Michigan and all throughout the U.S.?
Well, this legislation is to provide mental health services to students and staff who are in a school that has been impacted by a mass shooting or some other type of traumatic event, and provide mental health services immediately to those individuals in that school. So it'll provide counselors, psychologists, social workers, others that can be there to help folks immediately in the aftermath of a tragedy. It has been estimated that roughly a third of folks who witness a mass shooting develop PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorders, and or other kinds of acute stress disorders. It's critically important to help these individuals with mental health services as quickly as you can after an event. This legislation awards federal grants to local districts and schools. I work closely with the Oakland schools as well as national associations of social workers and other professionals to provide the resources necessary to help these individuals. The legislation will also study the impacts on student mental health. We need to know more about how these violent and traumatic events impact students, and so that we can better prepare should we have another horrific event like we saw in Oxford, and develop best practices. And it depends. If you look around the country, some schools simply don't have any type of mental health services or counseling available for their students. And if they get if they have a violent attack or a mass shooting occur in one of those schools, those students are in a particularly vulnerable position, and we want to make sure we're helping victims and folks who witnessed these attacks as quickly and as effectively as possible.
Senator Peters, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.